In this video, we're going to be talking about the line tools inside Illustrator and also how to transform both lines and shapes in Illustrator. On the left-hand side of the screen, just above the shape tools that we used last video, are the line tools. Within this, I'm going to start by using the line segment tool. And the line segment tool, simply enough, as you click and drag, draws a line. If I hold down Alt or Option on Mac, it will draw the line from a center point. And if I hold down Shift, it will draw the line at 45-degree increments. So very similar to the shape tools. Let's go ahead and go to the arc tool. So I drag the arc tool out. If I press the up arrow, it'll increase the curvature. If I press the down arrow on my keyboard, it will decrease the curvature. If I hold down Shift, it'll keep them both the exact same length, both legs of the curve. A little bit different here, but if you press the F button, the F key on your keyboard, you will flip the curve back and forth. Moving on, the spiral tool, if I click and drag, draws a spiral. The up arrow will add more legs onto the spiral. The down arrow will reduce the spiral. If I hold down Command, I can make the spiral a little bit tighter. If I hold down Command and I move my mouse away, it kind of unravels it. I can flip this back and forth, but I have to press the R instead of the F key. Moving on, we have the rectangular grid tool. As I drag that out, pressing the left and right arrows on my keyboard will change the number of columns. The up and down arrows will change the number of rows. If I hold down Shift, it will make it more constrained. And finally, the polar grid tool, which kind of makes a spider web. Same thing, if I press the up arrows, it adds more rings. The down arrows reduces the number of rings, and the left and right arrows add more pie slices. Now, all of these shapes and lines can be modified after we draw them in various different ways. I'm going to start with the shapes and how we modify those. I'm going to select this rectangle that I drew and just zoom in a little bit. And we have the typical transform tools, right? We can move it around, but we also have this little dot in the corner. These dots, if I click and drag, add rounded corners to our square. I can also rotate the rectangle, do various other transformations to it. Over here on the right-hand side, we have the transform options. There's tons of options in here. Play around with these and see what they all are. I find these to be really useful. This flips it. Not super noticeable on that one, but if I select this spiral, for instance, it'll flip the spiral. Very, very useful. So shapes all have little modifiers that you can play around with after the fact. So if I draw a polygon, I can come in here and grab this little rounded corner button and pull that in and add rounded corners. There's this plus and minus button right here. If I click and drag that, it'll add more sides and fewer sides. There's all sorts of different things you can do. Just play around with each shape and see what the different transformations are. Now, whenever it comes to transforming a line, you'll notice that we actually in Illustrator have two different selection tools. There's this black selection tool and this white selection tool. This is called the direct select tool, and this is the standard selection tool. So far we've been using the standard selection tool, which lets us grab control points and move things around, so it works pretty well. But whenever we need to modify a line very closely, we need to be using the direct selection tool. The direct selection tool, whenever I switch over to that, that's A on the keyboard. And by the way, the regular selection tool is V on the keyboard. So A and V, I usually just always have my hands on those keys to switch back and forth between them. The direct selection tool will allow you to grab individual points and do much more intense modifications that you normally would not be able to do. Now we're going to get into what these are, these Bezier curve handles. That's what these are. A little bit later in this video, but for now, just keep in mind that this direct selection tool allows you to modify many more aspects of your shape. So I'm in the standard selection tool. I can drag this around and reshape it, and if I hit A, I can grab each of these lines and modify them individually. So let's talk about how these modifications actually work. Whenever I have this path selected with the direct selection tool, we notice it has 2 points. It has an end point down here and an end point over here. And these are called vectors. Now we talked about the vector workflow. Basically, Illustrator has plotted these 2 points and it's drawn a line between them to our specifications. Now typically that line would look like this, right? It would be just a straight line from one point, this point right here, to this point right here. But in this case, whenever we're doing something like an arc, we have these other lines and these other dots that come out of it. These are called Bezier curve handles. We can come in here with the direct selection tool, again that's A on the keyboard, and grab these handles and actually move them around. Now how you can think about these handles is that they direct the curve of your object. So right now we have a line going and going and going, and then this is telling it to start curving here and meet up with this one, which is curving here. They take a little bit of getting used to, so I'd highly recommend playing around with them. And we'll get into these a lot more whenever we start using the pen tool. But for now, click and drag them around and see what happens. And notice how they modify the curves here. Every single shape has these. Really everything in Illustrator has these little handles. They're just kind of hidden. So I was able to access these handles by directly clicking that path and that vector and modifying it.